Richard, let's start with a big picture, right? It's about there is as I said at the start, enterprise automation is not new, but there is clear sense of urgency at the executive and board level about automation. And when I was doing some research for this particular episode, I noted down a couple of data points. One was around market valuation. So the globally enterprise automation market valuation in 2024 itself was around 75 billion. And when we talk about the growth projections for enterprise automation, there is a much higher and healthy CAGR of about 16% year on year, all the way up to 2031-32. Now, these data points indicate that there is a very clear and strong commitment from enterprise leaders to invest into automation for foreseeable future. So, in your view, what is actually why this automation is becoming such a high priority conversation topics at executive level, and what are the key drivers for that? What kind of internal and external drivers are making that shift?
I think there's a couple of them. Again, some are sort of longer term drivers that this is part of an ongoing challenge around legacy modernization that, there's a combination of legacy systems and even systems that haven't yet been automated that are causing an increasing burden on organizations from a productivity standpoint. And then at the other end, more recently in the last few years, there's obviously been this big push from artificial intelligence. And I think it's somewhat a convergence of those two factors coming together that's really making executives think actually now is perhaps the time that we can start to really make a dent in some of that legacy and really move forward with some of our automation initiatives.
Yeah. And you talked about AI, and so with emergence of AI-based automation, is it fundamentally changing the way automation is done, or is it just accelerating the old ways of automation models?
I mean, there's a few different angles to tackle it from. I think one of the challenges with AI, as we alluded to earlier, is not actually the technology. There's a very big change management issue in organizations around adoption. And that's putting a bit of a natural brake on what can be done and is being done currently. There are also a couple of areas that it's useful to split out in terms of where it's impacting automation. You can look at, say, individual sort of more fine-grained processes within an organization and look at how those could be modernized and updated with AI. So that's certainly one approach. And that's starting to produce some interesting results, not always positive. I think people are starting to realize that there are challenges associated with that. And then there's the other side, which is around the tooling which is being used in general for the whole software development life cycle in order to improve productivity, which is again an indirect but very significant boost to automation as well, especially in tackling some of those things like the legacy debt problem. So I think there's a bit of a convergence of some factors that are culturally making it difficult to adopt. That there are some factors where organizations are playing around with some sort of smaller scale use cases, but there is also opportunity coming in terms of that automation efficiency in the sort of tools that organizations are using.
Yeah. And is that the high priority and high priority expectations from enterprise leaders that you see, that productivity, efficiency are the main drivers of when organizations think of a big enterprise automation program?
I think there's definitely that vision is fairly common at senior levels within an organization, within the executive. There's that expectation that delivery timelines should be improving as this technology rolls out. Again, I think there's a bit of an expectation gap or reality gap once things actually hit the ground in implementations, that there are still quite a lot of challenges that aren't currently being addressed by some of the automation tools. There are some very interesting ones out there, some great interesting AI capabilities, but they're not necessarily moving the needle as much as the executives might expect in terms of productivity.
Yeah. And this has been challenge. I think this is a recurring challenge, as I think there is when we talk about any AI-based initiative in general. But then how do you expect the business leaders or executives think of measuring the success of those automation programs if it's not so tangible?
So I think there is tooling coming on board to help with that. So some of it again is not actually that new. We've been doing process re-engineering for a long time, and there's existing practices around how to measure and improve productivity if we look at it sort of at a process level. When you're looking to incorporate AI, however, I think there are a few things to be aware of. You do obviously need to be able to track, like let's say we're dealing with a process improvement sort of more low-level scenario. You do need to be able to track not just the potential costs that you're taking out from the human activities, but the difference potentially in error rates. And I think actually that's another thing about AI is errors occur in human processes. They're not just a new thing for AI. We need to sort of weigh them up objectively in terms of measuring what those error rates are on both sides, not just on the AI side, and how those errors are potentially mitigated, which is again nothing new. We have exceptions that need to be managed, but then also looking at other things like on the cost side of AI. I think a lot of people get surprised that there's a significant variation even in the cost base and the cost models of using AI as well, and they definitely need to be factored in, because that's often where organizations are hit by a bit of a nasty surprise that they may have done something that could technically be successful, but when they look at the overall ROI and they factor in the new costs of what the AI is doing, then they become much less attractive, or even potentially they get negative returns on it. So that's one aspect, and the other is a little bit more strategic, I would say, which is that's looking at a process improvement perspective. The other is to think strategically from an organization in terms of how do you structure and what kind of use cases do you target to do this automation in? Looking at your existing landscape, obviously, taking that into account, but also looking at, again, if you're going to leverage AI, looking at what kind of governance capabilities may be required for specific use cases, and whether those can then apply to a whole range of use cases and what actually required. Because we find that there's often a quite significant stepwise increase in the amount of governance that's needed for particular use cases. You can start off with some pretty easy ones, and then as you move up to dealing with things like privacy and knowledge-based management, it becomes significantly more challenging, and you do need to put a little bit of forward planning into those use cases as well, I think.
Yeah. That's a really great point, because these things are typically missed when you do the ROI or even a TCO for AI implementations, right? Because organizations typically focus on, okay, we need to build these models and then we need to roll those out, etc. But there's a lot more you need to do around that that is generally missed out. And so is there something here that we should demystify for enterprise leaders as to how they should think of ROI in general for these automations programs? Because sometimes, many times, I would say business leader think of an initiative would deliver immediate benefits when it comes to automation, but it is not always necessarily the case, right? And the other thing is, in terms of the KPIs, etc., that you can measure around automation, they are not very well defined. So, is there something you want to unpack for tech leaders or business leaders on that?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think part of the challenge around tracking the KPIs, I mean, look, I agree, some of them can be quite hard to track. Like, how do you, exactly quantify something like productivity? Some of them, though, I think are hard to track simply because the technology landscape is often so fragmented. Like, we know, for instance, that like take a fairly lengthy process, say like a procure to pay process. There are multiple steps in it. Often those steps are managed, some of them outside the system, like in emails. It's those gaps where the KPIs can't be tracked, which also creates issues. That's one of the reasons why I'm very keen on the idea of having platforms that can host a lot of the solution, because they actually make those core KPIs like time and cost easier to track. And the other thing is too, so, one of the things that we do, for example, if we're migrating a human workflow to, say, an automated or semi-automated or agentic workflow, is you don't necessarily, at least while you're building the project, have time or the metrics to get a great detailed view, but you want enough to know if you're going in the right direction, if things are getting better or getting worse. So if you can put in enough control over around, say, time and cost of specific activities and some of the other key cost drivers on, say, the automation side, whatever tooling you're using, the AI costs, things like that, at least you can get that ongoing feedback. And that's also what's really often missing in a lot of projects is, having that moment, often it happens a few months down the track where things are finished, and then we realize actually what the cost was and what the potential benefit was. If we can even get something directional, even if it's fairly coarse grain during the build, get enough metrics that we know we're going in the right direction, that can be a significant help to the project as well. And that's what we focus on in our systems, is being able to give you enough that are things getting better or are they getting worse?